Bob, let's start with you and the oil price. Why not seeing a bigger reaction to this? What's your take?
At the end of the day, supply, there's so much crude oil supply out there. Basically, crude oil global demand will increase by 1 million barrels in 2020. The supply situation is forecast to increase by an all-time record over 2 million barrels a day. The existing record is 1.9 million in 1978. So we're going to outstrip the global demand situation by well over 1 million barrels. And at the end of the day, that's going to put a cap on prices.
So what do you think is actually priced in? Because we've seen some rebuilding of some net longs in WTI and Brent, along with the oil price, as we've had this rally over the last 7 weeks. But in reality, what do you do?
Well, I think that everybody was waiting on this meeting. They were hoping for some kind of big number to come out, led by the Saudis. It really didn't happen. Plus, you have this condensate situation. That's kind of an easy way out. They basically agreed to the Russians' request to keep them in the program, in my opinion.
So, and this is sort of showing the run-up in positioning as well as the oil price. And this is the backdrop for Saudi Aramco pricing its IPO. Now, Thibault, you've done some work on sort of a risk of climate change. In the prospectus, Saudi Aramco tried to address that risk, basically saying that, yes, climate change could impact things like oil demand as well as other hydrocarbon demands. What's your base case for the risk for Saudi Aramco?
Well, actually, we look on the risk for Saudi Aramco production, Saudi Aramco infrastructure, and we pinpoint 4 main risks. One is warming. With higher temperature, you have damage to equipment, damage to workers as well. And the second one is food, especially on the western coast of Saudi Arabia. And then we have sea level rise. And finally, access to fresh water.
So what kind of drag is it? Like how much could that suck off of the valuation and the pricing of Saudi Aramco?
Yeah, it's actually very hard to say without more access to more information, and I think it's a key problem here. But what we demonstrate with our research is that these risks are significant. They cannot be ignored.
So, Bob, how do you look at it then as an investor? Because Saudi Aramco had a hard time marketing this outside of Saudi Arabia. Temasek, one of Singapore's sovereign wealth funds, basically said we don't necessarily want to invest because of climate change. How do you look at it?
Well, the way I look at it is it's the all-time record IPO. They accomplished that goal, and the total valuation is a little bit over 1.7 trillion, within striking range of Crown Prince's goals. So in that regard, it's a success. Now, listen, we may trade lower. They picked us a good time right now. Crude oil has been trading above $50 for 11 months now. It could easily slide below, but right now it's above, and it's at the top end of the range it's been at since September. And it was a good time to do the deal. Listen, at some point, it's crude oil. We'll trade back above. They basically have 3.5% that they're loaded up on that they would like to get out in the market at some point. They're going to wait until there's a good time when crude oil prices are bid to take that to the global market and execute the program.
But in terms of, say, the investor hatred or dislike of oil stocks, how much of that do you think is just cyclical and you need a higher oil price and better demand versus how much is structural and investors actually starting to price in climate change and CO2 risk?
I think right now, ideally, people look at that, the future of the planet type situation. But when you get a ripper in crude oil, that changes minds really quickly.
Okay, fair enough. So like fickle investors in that respect. Okay, so Thibault, you've done the work on the climate change issue when it comes to Saudi Aramco. Can these companies fix it?
I think it's pretty easy to fix it for future infrastructure. If you build a new refinery or new infrastructure, any infrastructure, you can take into account what will be the temperature or the precipitation during the time of this infrastructure will be exploited. It's a bit harder when you already have installations which are very intensive in capital, very complex. It's difficult to adapt them to conditions that are different than the ones they were expected to meet.
Thibault, Saudi Aramco would say that its geology is actually the best in the world and that they have lighter carbon than the rest of the world when they go and drill for it. Is that a valid pushback to the climate change concerns?
Well, actually, it's a bit beyond my point because You know, I don't work on greenhouse gases emission. I work on the effect of this emission and the effect of climate change for companies. So yes, maybe their whole has a good performance for emission, but they will be victim of climate change as well, and they have to think about what will be the impact for them and on their infrastructure.
All right, Bob, last word to you. I'm starting to get some calls for $40 oil. Do we see that?
I don't think any time in the near future. It's winter time. We should have a bid in the heating oil market, which, by the way, is not really happening. But it's that time of year. We should be bid there. And, you know, we've been chopping around in this range for quite some time. We're at $50. This is the highest we've been since September. So we had our first draw in storage this week in 6 weeks. And if that continues to be the case, it won't happen anytime in the next couple of weeks.